The basement door was open. That single detail, so ordinary, so easily overlooked, would haunt Detective Sarah Brennan for 23 years. Because when 12-year-old Emma Walsh disappeared from her bedroom in the quiet town of Fletcher's Creek, Michigan on October 14, 1987, that basement door shouldn't have been open. The family never used it. Emma's father, Robert Walsh, had painted it shut 3 years earlier after persistent drafts made the house unbearable during Michigan winters. But on that cold October morning, when Emma's mother Patricia went to wake her daughter for school, the girl was gone. The bedroom window was locked from the inside. The front and back doors were deadbolt. There were no signs of struggle, no ransom note, no witnesses. Just an empty bed with covers pulled back as if Emma had simply gotten up to use the bathroom. And that basement door, the one painted shut, standing wide open, revealing stairs that descended into absolute darkness. What investigators would discover 23 years later would turn everything they thought they knew about Emma Walsh's disappearance upside down. Because Emma didn't just vanish that October morning. She walked out of her house, past her sleeping parents, through a door that should have been impossible to open, and into a nightmare that would span 2 decades and connect to a secret so carefully hidden that even the people closest to her never suspected the truth. The first twist? Emma Walsh wasn't the first child to vanish through that basement door. The second? She wasn't the last. And the person responsible had been hiding in plain sight the entire time, attending vigils, organizing search parties, and comforting the Walsh family, while carefully orchestrating one of the most elaborate deceptions in Michigan criminal history. Before we dive into the 23-year investigation that would finally crack this case wide open, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what your first instinct is about Emma Walsh's disappearance. Was it a family member? A stranger? Something else entirely? And if you're new to Untold Cold Case Files, hit that subscribe button now. We dig deep into the forgotten cases that deserve to be remembered, and we don't stop until we uncover the truth, no matter how disturbing it might be. Trust me, you're going to want to see where this story goes. Fletcher's Creek, Michigan wasn't the kind of place where children disappeared. Nestled in the heart of Oakland County, about 45 minutes northwest of Detroit, Fletcher's Creek was the embodiment of the American dream circa 1987. Population 8,200. Tree-lined streets with names like Maple Grove and Willow Lane. A main street with a 5 and dime, a pharmacy with an actual soda fountain, and a movie theater that still showed double features on Saturday afternoons. This was a town where people didn't lock their doors, where kids rode their bikes until the streetlights came on and parents didn't worry, where the biggest scandal in recent memory had been when Principal Henderson at Fletcher's Creek Elementary had been caught having an affair with a music teacher 2 years earlier. The Walsh family fit perfectly into this Norman Rockwell painting. Robert Walsh, 41, worked as an accountant at Henderson and Associates downtown. Reliable, methodical. The kind of man who mowed his lawn every Saturday morning at precisely 9 a.m. and attended every PTA meeting without fail. His colleagues described him as quiet but friendly, the type who brought homemade cookies his wife baked to office parties and never forgot anyone's birthday. Patricia Walsh, 38, was a stay-at-home mother who volunteered at the library on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She taught Sunday school at Fletcher's Creek Methodist Church, organized the annual Christmas pageant, and hosted a book club that met the first Wednesday of every month. Her pumpkin bread was legendary at the church bake sales. And then there was Emma, 12 years old, 7th grade at Fletcher's Creek Middle School. With auburn hair she wore in 2 braids and a smattering of freckles across her nose. She played clarinet in the school band, not particularly well, but with enthusiasm. She was obsessed with collecting stickers and plastered them all over her bedroom mirror and the cover of her diary. Her favorite was a holographic unicorn she'd gotten at the Michigan State Fair that summer. Emma's best friend was a girl named Jennifer Hartley who lived 3 doors down on Sycamore Drive. They'd been inseparable since kindergarten. Spent every afternoon after school at one house or the other, usually sprawled across Jennifer's bedroom floor, listening to Madonna and Debbie Gibson on cassette tapes, practicing dance routines they'd make up themselves. Emma was just normal. Jennifer would later tell investigators, tears streaming down her 13-year-old face. She wasn't running away. She loved her parents. She was excited about Halloween coming up. She'd already picked out her costume. She was going to be Punky Brewster. We were going to trick or treat together, like always. The Walsh house at 247 Sycamore Drive was a modest two-story colonial painted cream with forest green shutters. 3 bedrooms upstairs, living room and kitchen on the main floor, and a basement that ran the length of the house. The basement was unfinished, concrete floors, exposed beams, a furnace in one corner, and years of accumulated storage. Christmas decorations, old toys, boxes of tax documents Robert hadn't gotten around to organizing. There were 2 entrances to the basement. The main one was an interior door off the kitchen that led down a sturdy set of wooden stairs. The other was an exterior bulkhead, those slanted metal doors that opened from the backyard directly into the basement, common in Midwest homes built in the 1950s. But here's what made 247 Sycamore Drive different. There was a third door, an old servant's entrance, a relic from when the house was built in 1952, tucked in the corner of the dining room. It was narrow, barely 2 feet wide, and led to a cramped set of stairs that descended into the basement at a steep angle. The door was original to the house, solid oak, with an old-fashioned glass knob that had frosted over with age. Robert Walsh had painted that door shut in 1984. The drafts were terrible, he would tell police. Cold air just poured up through that stairwell all winter. We never used those stairs anyway. They were too narrow, too steep. It made sense to just seal it up. I painted it the same color as the wall. After a while, you barely even noticed it was there. But on October 14, 1987, someone had noticed. Someone had cut through 3 years of latex paint. Someone had opened that door. And someone had taken Emma Walsh. The last time anyone saw Emma Walsh alive, or at least the last time anyone admitted to seeing her, was at 9:47 p.m. on Tuesday, October 13, 1987. Patricia Walsh had tucked her daughter into bed, kissed her forehead, and reminded her that she needed to finish her book report on Where the Red Fern Grows by Friday. Emma had groaned good-naturedly, promised she'd work on it after school the next day, and asked if they could have tacos for dinner tomorrow night. I told her yes, Patricia would later sob to investigators. I told her we'd have tacos. And she smiled at me. That was the last thing I saw, her smile. Robert Walsh had checked on Emma at 10:15 p.m. when he went to bed. She was asleep, or appeared to be, curled on her side with her beloved stuffed rabbit, a threadbare thing she'd had since she was 3, tucked under her arm. The house went quiet until 6:45 a.m. on Wednesday, October 14th, when Patricia Walsh climbed the stairs to wake Emma for school and found an empty bed. The first thought wasn't panic. It was confusion. Emma's bedroom door was closed, just as it had been the night before. The covers were pulled back neatly. Emma was a restless sleeper who usually tangled herself in blankets and sheets. Her clarinet case sat on her desk where she'd left it. Her backpack hung on the hook by her door, homework assignments tucked inside. Emma. Patricia called, checking the upstairs bathroom. Empty. She went downstairs, thinking maybe Emma had gotten up early, hungry for breakfast. The kitchen was empty. The television in the living room was off. Emma. That's when the first whisper of unease crept up Patricia's spine. She checked the front door. Deadbolt, chain in place. The back door leading from the kitchen to their small patio. Deadbolt, security bar in the bracket. All the windows on the first floor were locked. Robert came downstairs in his pajamas, concern creasing his face. What's wrong? I can't find Emma. They searched the house together. Every room, every closet, even the attic space accessed by a pull-down ladder in the upstairs hallway. Nothing. Emma's jacket still hung on the coat rack by the front door. Her shoes were lined up neatly in her bedroom closet. It was Robert who noticed the basement door. The old servant's entrance in the dining room, the one he'd painted shut 3 years ago, was standing open. Just a few inches, but unmistakably open. The paint along the edge was cracked and peeling, as if someone had carefully worked a knife along the seal to break it free. Patricia, Robert's voice was hollow. Call the police. Fletcher's Creek Police Department received the call at 7:02 a.m. By 7:20, two patrol officers, Dave Morrison and Linda Chun, were at the Walsh residence. By 8 a.m., Detective Sarah Brennan had arrived, and by 9 a.m., what started as a potential runaway case had transformed into a full-scale investigation. Because what Detective Brennan found in that basement would set the tone for the next 23 years. The interior basement stairs from the kitchen were clear, nothing unusual, no signs of disturbance. The exterior bulkhead was locked from the inside with a heavy sliding bolt that would have been impossible for a 12-year-old to manipulate from outside. But the narrow servants' stairs that descended from the dining room told a different story. Small footprints in the dust that had accumulated on the wooden treads. Child-sized, leading down, but no footprints leading back up. At the bottom of those stairs, investigators found something else. Scored into the concrete floor, barely visible unless you were looking for it. An arrow, scratched into the concrete with something sharp, pointing toward the back corner of the basement, where years of storage boxes created a maze of cardboard towers. At first, we thought maybe she was hiding. Detective Brennan would later testify. Kids sometimes hide when they're scared or upset. We called her name. We moved boxes. We checked every single corner of that basement. Emma wasn't there. But what they did find, wedged behind a stack of boxes containing old tax records, was a section of the basement wall that had been disturbed. The paneling, cheap wood paneling from the 1970s, had been removed and carelessly replaced. When investigators pulled it away, they discovered something that made Detective Brennan's blood run cold. A hole, roughly 3 feet by 3 feet, broken through the concrete foundation. And beyond it, darkness. A tunnel crude but functional, extending beyond the reach of their flashlights. Where does this go? Patricia Walsh whispered, her face ashen. That was the question that would haunt the investigation. Because when the Oakland County Sheriff's Department brought in excavation equipment and traced that tunnel, they discovered it ran 17 feet underground, extending from the Walsh basement, under their backyard, beneath the property line, and into the storm drain system that ran along the back of Sycamore Drive. The storm drains, an interconnected network of concrete tunnels large enough for a child or a determined adult to navigate. Drainage pipes that connected to the Fletcher's Creek watershed system, which in turn connected to dozens of access points throughout town. Emma Walsh could have emerged anywhere, or someone could have taken her anywhere. The town of Fletcher's Creek exploded into action. Within 12 hours of Emma Walsh's disappearance, Fletcher's Creek transformed from a sleepy bedroom community into a command center for one of the largest search operations Oakland County had ever seen. The high school gymnasium became headquarters. Maps covered the walls, marked with colored pins indicating search zones. Volunteers poured in, hundreds of them. Parents, teachers, shop owners, auto workers from the GM plant in Pontiac who drove over after their shifts ended. By Thursday afternoon, more than 800 volunteers had registered to help search. Jennifer Hartley's father, Tom Hartley, organized search parties of 20 people each, assigning them grid patterns through neighborhoods, parks, and wooded areas. They walked shoulder to shoulder, eyes on the ground, calling Emma's name until their voices grew hoarse. Patricia Walsh's sister, Diane Crawford, flew in from Columbus, Ohio, and took charge of the phone banks. 40 volunteers worked in shifts, answering calls from potential witnesses, coordinating with law enforcement, logging every single piece of information, no matter how insignificant it seemed. And the tips came flooding in. A cashier at the Kroger supermarket reported seeing a girl matching Emma's description getting into a blue sedan on Tuesday evening. The time frame was wrong. Emma was already home by then, but police followed up anyway. The blue sedan belonged to a grandmother picking up her own granddaughter. A truck driver swore he'd seen a young girl with auburn hair at a rest stop near Flint. Police raced to the location. It was a 16-year-old who'd run away from home in Indiana. A psychic from Ann Arbor called claiming she'd had a vision of Emma in a red barn surrounded by maple trees. Oakland County had 43 red barns. Every single one was checked. Detective Brennan coordinated with Michigan State Police, establishing roadblocks on major highways. Emma's photograph appeared on the evening news, on milk cartons, on flyers posted in every store window in a 50-mile radius. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children added Emma to their database. The FBI sent 2 agents from the Detroit field office, Special Agents Markowitz and Reynolds, who specialized in child abduction cases. They set up in a corner of the gymnasium headquarters, reviewing evidence, conducting interviews, building a profile of potential suspects. Statistically, Agent Markowitz explained to Detective Brennan, we're likely looking at someone the family knows. Stranger abductions are rare. Someone had access to that house, knew the layout, understood the tunnel system. The list of potential suspects grew. Robert Walsh's boss, Gerald Henderson, had been to the house several times for dinner parties. He had no criminal record, no history with children, but he was interviewed 3 times. His alibi checked out. He'd been at a business conference in Chicago the night Emma disappeared, with dozens of witnesses. The family's mailman, Stuart Perkins, knew everyone's routines. He delivered mail to 247 Sycamore Drive for 6 years. But Perkins had been on vacation in Tennessee, visiting his daughter, with receipts and photographic proof. Even Pastor William Thornton from Fletcher's Creek Methodist Church came under scrutiny. He'd known Emma since she was baptized, had taught her in Sunday school. The investigation of Pastor Thornton was quiet, discreet, but thorough. Nothing. The man had been at a church elders meeting until 11 p.m. that Tuesday night, then home with his wife. What about the neighbors? The Hartleys, Tom and Susan, with their daughter Jennifer. Devastated. Cooperative. Tom Hartley had practically moved into the gymnasium headquarters, coordinating searches 16 hours a day. Susan had organized meal trains for the Walsh family. They welcomed police into their home, opened every closet, every drawer. Nothing suspicious. The Delgados at 251 Sycamore Drive, elderly couple, married 43 years. They'd barely even known Emma beyond waving hello. The Mitchells across the street, newlyweds who'd moved in 3 months earlier. Both worked in Detroit, left early, came home late. On the night of October 13th, they'd been at a concert at the Fox Theater seeing Billy Joel. Ticket stubs proved it. Dead end after dead end. But the search continued. They dragged the pond at Fletcher's Creek Park. Divers went down into the murky water, searching through decades of discarded shopping carts and waterlogged tree branches. Nothing. They brought in cadaver dogs who alerted in 3 locations: a wooded area behind the elementary school, a drainage ditch near the highway, and bizarrely, the basement of the Fletcher's Creek Library. Each location was excavated. False positives. The dogs had detected decomposing animals, not human remains. Search teams explored the storm drain system, a nightmarish labyrinth of concrete tunnels, some large enough to stand in, others requiring searchers to crawl on their bellies through water and filth. They mapped every junction, every outlet, every access point. They found rusted bicycles, graffiti, evidence of teenage drinking parties, but no sign of Emma Walsh. As October bled into November, hope began to fade. The volunteers still came, but in smaller numbers. 50 instead of 500. The news crews packed up their satellite trucks. The FBI agents returned to Detroit, promising to stay on the case, but admitting they had no new leads. Patricia Walsh stopped sleeping. She sat in Emma's bedroom, clutching that threadbare stuffed rabbit, refusing to change anything. The sticker-covered mirror remained. The clarinet sat on the desk. The Punky Brewster costume hung in the closet, never worn. Robert Walsh went back to work, moving through his days like a ghost. His colleagues didn't know what to say. Some avoided him. Others offered awkward condolences. Detective Sarah Brennan refused to give up. She worked the case on her own time after her regular shifts ended. She reviewed witness statements at midnight in her kitchen, making notes, looking for patterns. She drove through Fletcher's Creek at 3 in the morning, trying to think like an abductor. Where would you go? How would you move an unconscious child without being seen? The breakthrough, when it finally came, didn't happen in 1987. It happened in 1992, 5 years after Emma Walsh vanished. On March 18, 1992, a construction crew breaking ground for a new shopping plaza on the outskirts of Pontiac, 12 miles from Fletcher's Creek, made a discovery that would reignite the Emma Walsh investigation. A worker operating a backhoe struck something that wasn't dirt or rock. The crew supervisor called for a halt. They dug carefully by hand. Bones. Small. Unmistakably human. The Michigan State Police forensic team arrived within hours. The excavation was painstaking, meticulous. Over 3 days, they unearthed a complete skeleton, a child, approximately 10 to 12 years old, buried in a shallow grave. And beneath the bones, they found something else. A backpack. Navy blue, rotted from years in the ground, but still intact enough to reveal its contents. A notebook with a name written on the inside cover in fading ink. Kayla Morrison. Grade 5. Kayla Morrison had disappeared from Rochester Hills, Michigan on June 8, 1985, more than 2 years before Emma Walsh vanished. She'd been riding her bike to a friend's house and never arrived. Her case had gone cold within months. No witnesses, no leads, no body. Until now. The discovery sent shockwaves through law enforcement. If Kayla Morrison had been buried in Pontiac, could Emma Walsh be nearby? The construction site was searched with ground-penetrating radar. Nothing else was found. But the coincidence was too significant to ignore. Detective Brennan, now a sergeant with the Oakland County Sheriff's Department, immediately saw the connection. Both girls were pre-adolescent. Both had disappeared from middle-class neighborhoods. Both had vanished without witnesses. But there was something else. Something that made Brennan's instinct scream. Rochester Hills and Fletcher's Creek were connected by the same storm drain system. Brennan spent weeks mapping it out, working with the county's Department of Public Works. The Clinton River watershed system. Miles of underground tunnels designed to manage stormwater runoff. Dozens of access points. A literal underground highway that connected multiple communities. Kayla Morrison had lived 4 blocks from a storm drain access point. Emma Walsh had been taken through a tunnel that led to the storm drains. Brennan presented her findings to the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office, requesting resources to investigate further. They were skeptical. 2 missing children over 2 years apart, with only circumstantial connections. But they couldn't ignore the possibility. A task force was formed. 4 detectives, 2 FBI agents, and 3 forensic specialists. Their mission: find other potential victims and identify a pattern. What they discovered was chilling. Between 1983 and 1991, 7 children had gone missing from communities in Oakland County. Not all at once, not in a pattern obvious enough to trigger an alert, but spread out over 8 years. Different ages, different circumstances, different reporting agencies that hadn't communicated with each other. But every single one lived within a half-mile of a storm drain access point. Melissa Chun, age 9, disappeared from Berkeley, Michigan, April 1983. Kayla Morrison, age 11, disappeared from Rochester Hills, Michigan, June 1985. Emma Walsh, age 12, disappeared from Fletcher's Creek, Michigan, October 1987. Tyler Brooks, age 10, disappeared from Troy, Michigan, March 1989. Zoe Kim, age 11, disappeared from Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, September 1991. 5 children, 5 unsolved cases. And now, with Kayla Morrison's remains found, evidence that at least some of these children were dead. The task force began the grim work of searching. Over the next 6 months, teams scoured the areas surrounding storm drain access points. They used cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, and systematic grid searches. And they found them. Melissa Chen's remains were discovered in a wooded area near Berkeley in July 1992. Tyler Brooks' remains were found beneath an abandoned industrial building in Troy in September 1992. But Emma Walsh and Zoe Kim remained missing. The media descended on Oakland County like locusts. The Detroit Free Press ran a front-page story. Storm drain killer. Serial predator hunted children through underground tunnels. The national news picked it up. CNN, ABC, NBC, all of them sent reporters. Patricia and Robert Walsh, who'd been living in a fog of grief for 5 years, suddenly found themselves thrust back into the spotlight. The renewed attention was excruciating. Every news story felt like ripping open a wound that had never healed. But Detective Brennan saw opportunity. Whoever took these children, she told the Walsh family in a quiet meeting at their home, knew those storm drains intimately. We're talking about someone who'd explored them, mapped them, understood them. Someone who could move through them in darkness. That narrows our suspect pool considerably. The task force compiled a list: utility workers, construction crews, urban explorers, county maintenance staff, anyone who might have had reason to access the storm drain system. They interviewed hundreds of people, and one name kept appearing, mentioned casually in multiple interviews, never quite suspicious enough to warrant attention. Until Detective Brennan noticed it. Raymond Holt, 57 years old in 1992. A civil engineer who'd worked for the Oakland County Department of Public Works from 1979 to 1990. His job? Maintaining the storm drain system. He'd literally spent years walking those underground tunnels, inspecting them, mapping them, knowing every junction and outlet. He'd retired in 1990, moved to northern Michigan, living in a cabin near Traverse City. He'd also lived in Fletcher's Creek from 1985 to 1988. At 302 Sycamore Drive, 6 houses down from the Walsh family. Detective Brennan felt the pieces click into place. The arrest of Raymond Holt on November 12, 1992, was anticlimactic. No dramatic chase. No standoff. Just Michigan State Police arriving at his cabin near Traverse City with a warrant, finding him drinking coffee on his porch, watching the November snow begin to fall. "I've been expecting you," he said calmly. What they found inside the cabin was a house of horrors. Photographs. Dozens of them, arranged in albums with dates and locations, carefully noted in neat handwriting. Kayla Morrison, Emma Walsh, Tyler Brooks, Zoe Kim, and others, children who hadn't been reported missing, children whose photographs were taken through windows, in playgrounds, at schools. Maps of the storm drain system, far more detailed than anything the county had on file. Notations marking access points, optimal routes, locations where sounds from above couldn't be heard. And a journal. 73 pages of single-spaced handwriting detailing his methodology, his selection criteria, his rationale. Raymond Holt had been hunting children for nearly a decade. The confession came easily. Too easily. Holt seemed almost relieved to talk, as if he'd been carrying a burden he was ready to set down. He'd worked for the Department of Public Works, yes. But his interest in storm drains had started long before that. As a teenager in the 1950s, he'd explored the tunnel systems beneath Detroit, fascinated by the hidden infrastructure beneath the city. When he got his degree in civil engineering, working on storm drains was a natural fit. But somewhere along the way, his fascination had twisted into something darker. They were easy, he told investigators, his voice flat, emotionless. Children are trusting. They don't understand danger the way adults do. And the tunnels gave me access to anywhere I wanted to go. I could be under their houses, listening to them through the drains. I could watch their routines. I knew when they'd be alone. The tunnel he'd dug from the Walsh basement had taken him 3 months of night work. He'd accessed their backyard through the storm drains, worked in darkness, removing small amounts of dirt each night and carrying it away through the tunnels. When the hole was complete, he'd hidden it behind the paneling, waiting for the right opportunity. Emma was special, he said, and something like emotion flickered across his face. She reminded me of my daughter. Detective Brennan's blood went cold. You have a daughter? Had. She died in 1982. Car accident. She was 11. The psychological profile came together. Raymond Holt hadn't been hunting children to harm them, at least not initially. He'd been trying to replace his daughter. He'd taken Melissa Chin first, kept her in a hidden room in his basement for 3 weeks, trying to make her into the daughter he'd lost. When she'd fought him, tried to escape, he'd panicked and killed her. The pattern had repeated. He'd take a child, try to make them compliant, grow frustrated or frightened when they wouldn't cooperate, and kill them. Each time promising himself it would be the last. each time unable to resist the compulsion when grief and obsession overwhelmed him again. But where were Emma Walsh and Zoe Kim? Holt's expression went blank. I want immunity for those. The negotiation was brutal. The Oakland County Prosecutor's Office refused to offer complete immunity, but they agreed to take the death penalty off the table if Holt revealed the locations of Emma and Zoe. Michigan had abolished capital punishment in 1846. It was a symbolic gesture, but it gave Holt's attorney leverage to demand life imprisonment with a possibility of parole after 30 years rather than life without parole. The deal was struck. On December 3, 1992, Raymond Holt led investigators to a property he owned in rural Livingston County. A small farmhouse with a barn isolated, accessed by a dirt road barely visible from the highway. He'd purchased it in 1986 using inheritance money from his mother's death. In the barn, hidden beneath a false floor, they found a room. And in that room, they found Emma Walsh, alive. What would you have done if you were a neighbor? Drop your theory in the comments. The most detailed answers might be featured in our next episode. She was 27 years old, 5 years older than she'd been the last time anyone outside that barn had seen her. The trauma was unspeakable. Emma had been kept in that underground room for 5 years. Holt had brought her food, supplies, even books, and a television with a VCR. He'd convinced her that her parents were dead, that he was protecting her from a dangerous world. As she'd grown older, he'd tightened his control, using psychological manipulation and the threat of violence to keep her compliant. But Emma Walsh had survived. And when investigators asked about Zoe Kim, Emma's face crumpled. She's here too, she whispered. Zoe was found in an adjacent room, also alive, also traumatized beyond measure. She'd been held for 14 months. The rescue made international headlines. Images of Emma and Zoe being brought out of that barn, wrapped in blankets, shielding their eyes from daylight they hadn't seen in years. Those images became seared into the public consciousness. Patricia and Robert Walsh were reunited with their daughter at a hospital in Ann Arbor. The press was kept away, giving the family privacy for those first overwhelming moments. No cameras captured Patricia's collapse when she saw Emma, or Robert's raw sobbing as he held his daughter, no longer a 12-year-old child, but a young woman who'd been stolen from them. The trial of Raymond Holt began in March 1993. The courtroom in Pontiac was packed every day. Media representatives from around the world, victim advocates, families of missing children hoping for closure in their own cases, and survivors, Melissa Chen's parents, Tyler Brooks' mother, Kayla Morrison's sister, all of them seeking some measure of justice. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Holt's photographs, his journal, his maps, his confession, and testimony from Emma Walsh herself, now 27, who took the stand and described 5 years of captivity with a composure that left the courtroom in stunned silence. He took everything from me, Emma said, her voice steady. My childhood, my adolescence, my chance to grow up with my family. But he didn't take my will to survive. Every day I was in that room, I told myself I would see my parents again. And I did. The defense argued diminished capacity. Raymond Holt's grief over his daughter's death had triggered a psychotic break that left him unable to distinguish right from wrong. Expert witnesses debated. Psychiatrists testified. The jury didn't buy it. On May 7, 1993, Raymond Holt was convicted on 5 counts of first-degree murder, Melissa Chen, Kayla Morrison, Tyler Brooks, and 2 other victims whose remains had been subsequently identified, and 2 counts of kidnapping, Emma Walsh and Zoe Kim. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. The judge's words rang through the courtroom. Mr. Holt, you have demonstrated a depravity and cruelty that defies comprehension. You stole these children's lives, their innocence, their futures. The mercy you denied them will not be extended to you. You will die in prison. Raymond Holt showed no emotion. He was led from the courtroom in shackles and transferred to the maximum security Michigan Reformatory in Ionia. But the legal proceedings revealed something that had been lurking in the background of the investigation, something that would become the final twist in this already twisted case. During the trial, Robert Walsh had seemed increasingly agitated. He'd missed several days of testimony, claiming illness. Patricia had seemed withdrawn, avoiding eye contact with the prosecutors. 3 weeks after Holt's conviction, Detective Sarah Brennan received an anonymous letter. It contained a single photograph and a brief note. Ask Robert Walsh about the basement door. Ask him why it was really painted shut. The photograph showed a much younger Robert Walsh, perhaps in his mid-20s, standing outside a storm drain entrance. Written on the back in faded ink, R.W. and R.H., June 1971. R.W. Robert Walsh. R.H. Raymond Holt. They'd known each other. The investigation that followed was quiet, discreet, handled by a special unit to avoid media attention that might compromise the Holt prosecution. What they discovered was that Robert Walsh and Raymond Holt had been friends in the early 1970s. Not close friends, but acquaintances who'd shared an interest in urban exploration. They'd explored storm drains together as a hobby, mapping tunnels beneath Detroit. The friendship had faded by the mid-1970s when Robert married Patricia and moved to Fletcher's Creek, while Holt had married and had his daughter. They'd lost touch for years, until 1985, when Holt had moved to Fletcher's Creek and discovered, by coincidence, that Robert Walsh lived just 6 houses away. They'd reconnected briefly. Casual, neighborly conversations. Holt had visited the Walsh house twice, once for a neighborhood barbecue in the summer of 1986, and once the following spring when Robert had invited several neighbors over to watch a Tigers game. It was during that second visit that Holt had seen Emma Walsh for the first time, and something in him had recognized an opportunity. He would later admit, in a supplemental statement given to avoid prosecution for perjury, that he'd examined the Walsh house carefully during those visits. He'd noticed the old servant's entrance. He'd recognized the layout, understood the basement's proximity to the storm drain system. But Robert Walsh's culpability went further. In August 1987, 2 months before Emma's disappearance, Robert had seen Raymond Holt near his backyard one evening. Late, perhaps 11 p.m. Robert had been taking out the trash and noticed a figure near the property line. It had been Holt doing preliminary work on the tunnel. Robert had recognized him. They'd spoken briefly. Holt had explained he was checking storm drain access points for the county, routine maintenance. Robert had believed him because he'd wanted to believe him, because the alternative was too disturbing to consider. But in the days after Emma's disappearance, when Robert had seen that basement door standing open, when he'd seen the tunnel, something in him had recognized what it meant. And he'd said nothing. Not to police. Not to his wife. Not to anyone. Because acknowledging the connection would have meant acknowledging his own failure. That he'd let a predator near his family. That he'd ignored warning signs. That his daughter's abduction had been facilitated by his own blindness. The guilt had eaten him alive for 5 years. When Emma was found alive, the relief had been overwhelming. But the secret remained. The knowledge that he'd seen Holt that night in August, that he'd had a chance, however small, to prevent what happened. The Oakland County Prosecutor's Office faced a dilemma. Robert Walsh hadn't committed a crime, technically. He hadn't assisted Holt. He hadn't covered up evidence. His failure had been one of realization and courage, not conspiracy. But the optics were devastating. After lengthy deliberation and consultation with victims' rights advocates, prosecutors decided not to bring charges. The reasoning: Emma and Zoe needed their families intact. Patricia Walsh, who'd known nothing about Robert's history with Holt, didn't deserve to lose her husband to prison on top of everything else they'd endured. Instead, Robert Walsh was required to undergo psychiatric evaluation and counseling. He also had to provide testimony that would be sealed and used only if Holt ever appealed his conviction. The media never learned the full story. A few reporters suspected something, but without confirmation, they couldn't publish. The Walsh family was allowed to maintain their privacy. But within the family, the revelation fractured everything. Patricia Walsh filed for divorce in 1995. She couldn't reconcile Robert's silence with the years of agony they'd endured. Emma sided with her mother, cutting off contact with her father. Robert Walsh moved to Grand Rapids, changed his name, and lived out his remaining years in isolation. He died of a heart attack in 2006 at the age of 62. Detective Sarah Brennan, who'd spent 6 years hunting for Emma Walsh and whose persistence had ultimately saved 2 young women's lives, was haunted by the revelation of Robert's connection to Holt. The case was solved, she said in a 2010 interview. Justice was served. But I'll never stop wondering, if Robert Walsh had spoken up in August 1987, could Emma's captivity have been prevented? Would Zoe Kim have been spared? Those questions keep me up at night. Raymond Holt died in prison in 2009. Brain cancer. He was 74 years old. Emma Walsh, who reclaimed her identity after years of therapy, chose a path of advocacy. She founded the Underground Voices Project in 1998, an organization dedicated to supporting survivors of long-term captivity and educating the public about the psychological tactics used by abductors. Her work has helped change how law enforcement and mental health professionals approach recovery for kidnapping victims. In 2003, she published a memoir, Beneath the Surface: My Journey from Darkness to Light. The book spent 14 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list and has been translated into 27 languages. Emma donated all proceeds to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. She also became instrumental in pushing for legislative changes. The Emma Walsh Act, passed by the Michigan legislature in 2001, mandated better coordination between law enforcement agencies in missing children cases and established protocols for investigating interconnected infrastructure systems, storm drains, utility tunnels, abandoned buildings as potential criminal venues. Zoe Kim, who was younger when rescued and struggled more visibly with trauma, took a quieter path. She completed her education, earned a degree in social work, and now works with traumatized children in the Ann Arbor area. She rarely speaks publicly about her experience, but has said that helping others heal has been essential to her own recovery. Patricia Walsh never remarried. She continued to live in Fletcher's Creek, not at 247 Sycamore Drive, which she sold in 1995, but in a small house near the library where she still volunteers. She and Emma maintained a close relationship until Patricia's death in 2018 at the age of 71. The underground room where Emma and Zoe were held was demolished in 1994. The property was purchased by the county and converted into a memorial park, a peaceful space with walking trails, a playground, and a monument bearing the names of Melissa Chin, Kayla Morrison, Tyler Brooks, and the other children who didn't survive Raymond Holt's obsession. Emma Walsh attended the dedication ceremony in 1995. Standing before the crowd, she read a poem she'd written during her captivity. Words scratched onto paper with a stubby pencil Holt had allowed her. Words she'd memorized during those 5 years of darkness. They tried to bury me, but I was a seed. They tried to silence me, but I became a voice. They tried to break me, but I chose to grow. I am the light that survived the darkness. I am the story that refused to end. As for Detective Sarah Brennan, she retired from the Oakland County Sheriff's Department in 2008 after a 32-year career. She consulted on cold cases for another decade, helping other departments investigate long-dormant missing person files. In a final interview before her retirement, a reporter asked if she'd ever truly found closure in the Emma Walsh case. Brennan was quiet for a long moment. "Closure is a myth," she finally said. "What we have is resolution. We found Emma. We found Zoe. We stopped Raymond Holt from taking anyone else. But the years those girls lost, the trauma they carry, the families torn apart, you don't close those wounds. You just learn to live with the scars." She paused, looking out the window of her office at the Oakland County landscape. "But I'll tell you what keeps me going. Emma Walsh survived. She didn't just survive, she thrived. She turned her nightmare into purpose. That's not closure. That's victory. And sometimes that's enough." If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of never giving up on the missing, then subscribe to Untold Cold Case Files. Share this video to honor the voices that might have been silenced. And remember, every view keeps their story alive. Emma Walsh's story deserves to be told, and so do countless others still waiting for justice. Drop a comment and let me know Do you think Robert Walsh's silence made him complicit? Should he have faced criminal charges? The most insightful responses will be featured in our next deep dive. And please, if you or someone you know has information about a missing person, speak up. Your voice could be the one that brings someone home.